ever jumped into one of those courses, the professor kind of throws their hands up and is like, all right, guess we'll figure this out together, huh?
Uh-huh. Oh, I've been there.
That's exactly where we're diving in today. We're looking at a college course, game design patterns, but with a twist. They're using some seriously cutting-edge tech.
See, that's what I find so fascinating. It's not just about games, right? It's about how we learn, how education itself has to adapt to these new tools, a whole other layer on top of the actual course content.
Absolutely. Our source material here is a lecture transcript, and right off the bat, the professor, I love this, he just comes out and says, yeah, still figuring out how to run things, especially with this bigger class size.
Which I think really highlights that need for flexibility, even in like a structured learning environment. I mean, education can't just be static, right?
Yeah,
Especially not these days.
100%. And then get this, when he's talking about final grades, he throws in this phrase, mushy factors. I about died laughing.
Key factors. Okay, I gotta hear this.
I know. But it's brilliant, right?
Uh-huh.
Like he's acknowledging that not everything is so black and white, especially when you bring new tech into the mix.
It's like the grading system itself has to like level up alongside the tools.
Exactly. And speaking of new tech and leveling up,
Yeah.
this student questions in this lecture,
Mm-hmm.
so relatable. They're worried about AI accuracy, if they can trust it, even if it's ethical to use the whole shebang.
And these aren't just, theoretical concerns. These are students facing real-world anxieties about AI. We're living this stuff now.
Right. And here's the kicker, the professor doesn't shy away from it at all. In fact, he's just like, oh yeah, by half my code, AI wrote it. Transparency for the win.
See, that's key. Because he's not pretending like this stuff isn't happening. He's upfront about his own AI usage, which I think validates those student anxieties and opens the door for some real honest discussion about it.
100%. And it gets even better. He breaks down his AI usage costs $12. He's using a tool, GPT-4 Mini, specifically because it's cost effective.
Which, again, highlights the accessibility of this stuff now. It's not just for big tech companies with bottomless pockets. Individual educators are finding ways to actually integrate these tools, which blows my mind a little.
Right. It really makes you think, how long until this is just like standard practice in classrooms? But then this course takes it a step further. It's not just about using AI. It's about making it central to how you learn. And that's where this thing Brace comes in.
Okay, Brace. Now that is fascinating. It's not just a chatbot, right? This is personalized for each student. Imagine like having a study buddy available 24/7 who can answer even those, wait, is this a dumb question? Kind of questions.
No kidding, especially late at night when you're just like, come on, brain, work with me here.
Exactly. I think it has the potential to fundamentally change how students learn, especially in a field like game dev that moves so crazy fast.
Okay, but let's be real. Is Brace perfect?
Yeah.
What's the catch?
Well, the professor does mention these moments where Brace goes a little off script. He calls them hallucinations, which honestly,
Hallucinations. Is Brace secretly writing a sci-fi novel on the side?
not quite. It's not sentient or malicious or anything. Think of it more like the AI misinterpreting a prompt, or maybe it doesn't have enough context to give a totally accurate answer, like a little hiccup in the matrix.
Got it, got it. So more of a glitch than full-on AI uprising.
Exactly. And this is where student feedback is so crucial. By reporting these hallucinations, they're basically helping the professor debug and refine Brace, like, in real time.
So it's crowdsourced AI training, but instead of feeding it data, they're helping it course correct. That's kind of brilliant.
Totally. And again, it speaks to a more collaborative approach to both teaching and technology development, which I think is really cool.
So we've got this AI assistant. It's still got some rough edges.
Mm-hmm.
How do we actually use it effectively? Like, are there best practices for this?
The professor actually gives 2 really solid tips, which frankly are worth their weight in gold for anyone working with AI tools. Tip number 1, the regenerate button.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So, say Brace is stuck, right? Don't waste time agonizing over your phrasing. Just hit regenerate and see what happens. It's like asking the AI to shuffle its deck of responses, and maybe a different approach will click.
I love that, like, hitting the reset button on a conversation that's gotten a little off track.
Exactly. Sometimes a fresh perspective is all it takes.
And what's tip number 2? There was another one, right?
Right, the continue button. This one's interesting because it suggests that, like, Brace might have more to say, but needs a little encouragement to, get it all out.
Oh, so it's like trying to find the right words, just like the rest of us when we're explaining something kind of complicated.
Exactly. Even AI thought processes, right? They're not always linear or instantaneous. Sometimes they need a little guidance, just like a student might need prompting from a teacher.
That is such a good point. It's easy to think of AI as this all-knowing oracle, but in reality, it's still learning and figuring things out,
Right.
which actually is a good segue. Let's shift gears from the AI assistant to the language this whole course is built on TypeScript. What is this thing, and why should we care?
So the way the professor describes it, TypeScript is like JavaScript, but with, guardrails.
Yeah.
And he emphasizes, like, most valid JavaScript code is already valid TypeScript, which is kind of reassuring if you're just starting out.
It's like he's saying, hey, you already know half of this, which is a great way to put people at ease, especially if they're intimidated by the whole coding thing.
Right. It's not starting from scratch. It's building on what you already know. And he makes it even more approachable. He introduces this thing called the TypeScript Playground, which from what I gather is like a risk-free space to experiment. You can play with code from the lecture, break things, see how it all works without the pressure of like a formal setup.
It's like a digital sandbox for code. I love that.
Hmm.
But what are the big takeaways here? What does TypeScript actually do?
One of the main things is this idea of specifying data types. Like you can tell the computer, hey, this variable, it's going to be a number, or this one's going to be text, which helps catch errors early on, like trying to add a word to a number, which would normally trip JavaScript up like crazy.
It's like having a spell checker for your code, making sure you're using the right words in the right places.
Perfect analogy. And while TypeScript can often figure out the type on its own, the professor stresses that being explicit is good practice. Makes your code more readable, more predictable, especially when you're working on bigger projects.
Like the difference between, someone understanding your rambling explanation versus having clear step-by-step instructions. Clarity is key.
100%. And then there's this other concept, the any type, which is kind of a double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, any is like a wild card. It tells TypeScript, this variable could be anything, a number, a string, a cat video, the meaning of life. I don't care.
That sounds incredibly freeing. No more data types holding me back.
It is super flexible, but overuse it and your code becomes less predictable, harder to debug. It's like having a key that fits every lock, which, yeah, might be convenient, but also kind of defeats the purpose of having locks, right?
So it's a trade-off, like most things in life. Flexibility versus, robustness. That's fascinating.
For sure. Now, how do you feel about interfaces?
Interfaces? Hold on. Are we designing the next hit video game already?
Not quite. Think of it like this. You're building a house, right? You wouldn't just start piling up bricks randomly, would you? Well, hopefully not.
I mean, I've seen some interesting architectural choices, but I get your point. You need a blueprint.
Exactly. And that's what interfaces are, blueprints for your data. They make sure everything fits together logically, makes your code more organized, especially as it gets more complex.
So TypeScript helps us wrangle our code, make it neat, prevent those data type disasters. But then the professor, he hits us with this really thought-provoking comparison. He says, learning TypeScript is kind of like coming to terms with all of JavaScript's quirks. Building better tools around, like an inherently messy language.
Powerful analogy, right? It's that reminder that no tool is perfect. Sometimes the best we can do is acknowledge the limitations and figure out clever ways to work around them.
So it's not about getting frustrated by the quirks. It's about becoming, explorers, inventors, crafting solutions that not only solve problems, but maybe even spark a little joy in the process. It's like we're not just coding, we're crafting, right? Like there's an art to it, even when the underlying materials are a little rough around the edges.
100%. And that actually brings us to the professor's final thought, which really stuck with me.
All right, hit me with it.
So he compares learning TypeScript, right? Becoming fluent in this thing. It's like learning to appreciate all the quirks of JavaScript, once you understand the rules, you can start to bend them, play with them, create something truly unique.
Because limitations, if you look at it a certain way, can actually breed creativity.
Exactly. And it got me thinking, if TypeScript is this tool for taming JavaScript's wild side, what other tools are out there, maybe even outside of programming, right? Tools that help us find that same kind of joy, that same productivity, even when we're dealing with systems that are inherently, imperfect.
Oh, that is such a good point. Think about it. Communication, collaboration, even just the way we organize our own thoughts. None of those systems are perfect, but we find ways to make them work.
Right. And maybe the real challenge, the real opportunity is in finding those tools, honing them, maybe even inventing our own.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we started with a single lecture transcript.
Yeah.
And look where we ended up. Cutting-edge tech, the future of education, and this whole idea of embracing imperfection.
We saw how AI tools like Brace could totally change how students learn, how TypeScript brings order to the chaos of JavaScript, and how the most powerful tools often come from a deep understanding of a system's limitations, not in spite of them.
It reminds us that learning, at its core, isn't just about memorizing facts or mastering techniques. It's about cultivating this mindset of curiosity, adaptation, maybe even a little bit of playful rebellion against the way things should be.
Because it's in those messy, unexpected, seemingly imperfect spaces where the most profound insights often hide.
Beautifully said. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those what-if questions, and remember, sometimes the greatest discoveries, they're found not in spite of the imperfections, but because of them.